Hi, disgruntled Pokémon fan here, with a disorganized video that he probably shouldn't make. I'm not really sure where the rest of the general public stands on this, but I always assumed that Pokémon was the only game series that did what it did. AKA, it's the only turn-based RPG series that lets you pick your team from a huge roster of characters, from cool-looking dragons to cute-looking mascot characters. And, as it turns out, I'm kind of an asshole for assuming that. Because holy shit, why didn't anybody tell me that Shin Megami Tensei was just Pokémon but with angels and demons? I want to quickly clarify that I know that Pokémon has competitors now. There's Yokai Watch, Temtems, and that weird-looking game that looks like Pokémon but with war crimes. But none of those games were on shelves when I was a kid, and they didn't have a TV show that would get me to race home from school so that I could record it on VHS, and they didn't have a card game I could waste countless allowances on. Despite not having bought into the last generation of Pokémon games, I still feel a deep sense of loyalty to that franchise. Call it a sunk cost fallacy. So, when I look at these other franchises, I can't help but feel like they're trying a little too hard to just be the next Pokémon, instead of trying to be their own thing. Look, I'm 30 years old now. I can't keep pretending to be a 10-year-old trying to become the Pokémon Master. But, what if I was a teenager with a gun, pointed sky high directly at God himself, as I scream at him to come down from the heavens to face me and my team of overpowered heroes, myths, and legends? Yeah, Shin Megami Tensei may not have Charizard, but you know what it does have? Fucking Thor. Not good enough? What about Chernobog? How about this funny character? And you know what else that these games have that the Pokemon games haven't had since, like, the earliest Game Boy games? Difficulty, thank Christ. I don't mean the demon with the cross, I mean, fuck. What you have here is a winning formula to get me, Sean, interested in your franchise. So, let's talk about my experience with Shin Megami Tensei, aka SMT for short. About a year ago, I stumbled onto a review of a game called Shin Megami Tensei If. If what? The name alone had me intrigued, and at that point, the only things that I knew about Shin Megami Tensei was Joker in Smash, the Persona 4 dancing meme, and
Tyrone, you are but casual scum. Why don't you play a real Shin Megami Tensei game like Nocturne or Strange Journey?
So I really have no idea why I clicked on that video, other than sheer curiosity or simply having run out of things to watch that day. Luckily, my boy Marshall set me straight, and by the end of his review, he actually had me excited to download an emulator for the first time since high school, and I got hyped to try out this obscure, Japanese-only SMT game. The version that I ended up playing was the English-patched SNES version. And because it was my first SMT game that I played, I want to focus on it for a bit, as this game set my expectations for the rest of the franchise going forward. In my opinion, now that I've actually played a few of the different titles, I'd actually argue that this is one of the best starting points for anyone looking to get into SMT. My reasoning being that a lot of the games that come before this one really begin to feel their age. When you get poisoned or paralyzed in SMT1, this is what happens to your movement in the overworld. I'm holding down the direction to move left, by the way. And the ones that come after it are so different that I think you actually risk losing an appreciation of where the franchise started. Also, unlike some of the other titles, the story and setting of SMT If is relatively simple. Starting us off, what we have here is your basic school setting, fairly recognizable if, like me, you are a connoisseur of Japanese media. Then pretty quickly your school gets pulled into a hell dimension, isekai style. Why? Well, it's because one particularly angsty teenager was fed up with being picked on at school. So instead of just bringing a gun to school like a normal weirdo, he went for the far more creative option select of ascending to godhood, so that he could trap his bullies in various sin-themed worlds and enact ironic punishments upon them, like making lazy kids work in a mine in the world of sloth, Or forcing teenage girls to fall in love with hot guys? Yeah, this game can get a little weird. When you finally get control for the first time, it's up to you to figure out what has happened to your school, and to pick one of your classmates to help you escape from this hell dimension. What should have taken me maybe 10 minutes at best, ended up taking me well over an hour as I was trying to acclimate myself to the dungeon crawling style of gameplay. I had experienced this interface before in games such as the original Phantasy Star, but those games also have towns and overworlds, and I had a hard time trying to wrap my head around the fact that everything in this game was essentially going to be inside of the maze. Your shops and your other vendors, your healing fountains, it's all part of the maze. It was more than just the gameplay that took me a while to adjust to in those first few hours, as I realized there was going to be a whole lot of new concepts I was going to have to wrap my head around. Number one, of course, is that computers can be used to talk to, store, and then summon demons, because why not? Number two, demon is something of a catch-all term, as even angels are referred to as demons, and so are ghosts, and also women. And number three, yes, we are actually summoning demons in this game. Do you remember the absolute moral panic that was Pokémon when it first came out? We had preachers telling our parents that Pokémon was a gateway to black magic, and that it taught us how to summon demons. Could you even imagine the absolute shitstorm that would have popped off if this was the franchise that they were talking about back then? This would have gotten an adult-only rating, and would have been banned off store shelves immediately. The first weapons store you find in this game has a humble RPG merchant who will sell you a gun. And one of the earliest boss fights in this game is your science teacher. It's fun for the whole family. So, let's talk about demon negotiation. In any random encounter, you can elect to talk to the demons instead of fighting them. I'd heard that demon negotiation was used as an inspiration by Toby Fox when he created Undertale, but I never expected that the system would be this fleshed out, especially in a game that was this old. There are a lot of unique dialogue options here. Actually, there is probably more dialogue here than there is in the entire rest of the game, which I guess is to say that there's not really a lot of plot. Talking to demons can accomplish a few things. Most importantly, it is how you convince them to join your team, which is done by trying to pin down their personality and appealing to them with different options. Talking also allows you to flee from battles more easily than the escape option if you know what you are doing, as well as you can beg the demons for items and money. I'll show off a few of my favorite conversations that I managed to record, and keep in mind that some of this dialogue is probably a result of the translation. So this is actually the first conversation I had on this playthrough, and you tell him how your little ARM computer thing works, and he just jumps right in. There are a few enemies that will fall in love with your partner if they are one of the two female characters, and if you get the option to sing to them, then you can knock out their entire team for free. If your protagonist is a female, then you get the same option, but your character apparently sucks at singing and they just end up attacking you. There are also some shockingly less wholesome options here as well. I'm not really sure what happened here, but I ended up getting stuck feeding these demons brownies for a while. And then there's this bit of dialogue here, which I think speaks for itself. Anyways, getting back on track. In this game, demons that join your party do not level up or learn new moves, which means that as you progress the game, you are going to need to get stronger demons. And the best way to do this is through Demon Fusion. Demon Fusion is, by far, the most appealing part of this franchise to me. I will turn these games on and sit for hours, mindlessly fusing 2 or 3 demons together just to see what I'm gonna get, and then I will turn the game off and try it again. It's so bizarre that in a game where you build an actual rapport with your team members, that you can just as easily mash them together to suit your earliest convenience. It's just so weirdly heartless, yet fitting for the darker tone of these games. One of the other things I'd heard about this franchise is its difficulty, which is something that really appealed to me as it's something that I think a lot of modern RPGs are missing. That being said, despite stumbling a bit at the start and getting my ass kicked by the random encounters before I knew what I was doing, there weren't really many roadblocks in the way of completing this game, at least in terms of the boss battles. That is until you get to New Game Plus and you run into Bushiasta, and holy hell does this thing suck wild amounts of ass. The real challenge of this game, and for the franchise as a whole in my opinion, comes from the labyrinthine dungeon designs, many of which you'd be insane to try to complete without a map. As the game progresses, it throws increasingly difficult dungeons at you, filled with traps that are designed to drain your resources or your real-life sanity. Some feature gimmicks that I never ever want to see repeated in another game ever again. It took me 3 days and 4 sittings to beat the World of Sloth, as I refused to skip any battle that I encountered. A choice that will forever leave scars on my psyche. I know it's a bit abrupt, but I want to move on from SMT If, as I think that this game is worth experiencing for yourself, and also so that I can talk about the next 2 games that I played, both of which are also spin-offs from the main franchise. The first is Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner, and the other, its indirect sequel, Devil Summoner Soul Hackers. Starting with Devil Summoner, what we have here is a Japanese-only Sega Saturn release that was eventually ported to the PSP, and there are a few problems with this game right off the bat. Number 1 being that I cannot read a word of Japanese. Luckily, there is an English script that you can follow along with, which also serves as a walkthrough for the game, although it does not include the dialogue for demon negotiation or for minor NPCs, so unfortunately, I'm going to miss out on that content until there's an English patch. Secondly, the soundtrack on the PSP version got a little deep-fried during the porting process. Here, have a listen. I'm not really sure how this happened, but it's not a huge problem, as you can find the original soundtrack on YouTube. Jumping into the game itself, I won't lie, it gave me a little bit of a Newgrounds or like a fan-made game vibe. The overworld just looks a little undercooked at first glance, and a lot of the sprites for the enemies are so low-res that I couldn't really figure out what I was supposed to be looking at until I referenced the official artwork. I get it though, the Sega Saturn was a weird console, and trust me when I say this, the setting of Devil Summoner totally makes up for it. If we were to describe the games as if they were common tropes, Shin Megami Tensei If would be a mixture of a high school anime and an isekai, while Devil Summoner is a cross between a paranormal mystery and detective fiction. To loosely describe the setup for Devil Summoner and to keep it fairly spoiler-free, just before the game kicks into gear, your character dies, and his soul takes over the body of a recently deceased private detective and certified Devil Summoner. His job was to track down and prevent cases of demon activity within the city. By taking over this Devil Summoner's life, you end up rubbing shoulders with members of his support network. There is the weapons dealer who uses a real estate agency as his front. The place where you fuse demons in this game is under the guise of a Victorian hotel, and reveals a hidden basement only to Devil Summoners such as yourself. There is a gym run by this guy who keeps a medical room in the back, and there are also a few bars and clubs that let you discreetly meet up with people who have jobs for you. Also, there's this obviously shady character. The whole thing has this great Shadowrun vibe to it, and you get the sense that this city has probably always had this darker side to it that has been housed neatly within its underbelly. Pair all of this with a cool, jazzy soundtrack, and it feels like I'm right at home. To quote, it's some comfy shit. The story of this game is a lot more complex than Shin Megami Tensei If. You're gonna be bumping into Yakuza, dealing with nosy police officers, battling with evil summoners, as well as infiltrating large organizations that have been taken over by demons. All the while as you slowly uncover a massive conspiracy that threatens to destroy all of Japan. It isn't anything too crazy by SMT standards, but it's a pretty fun ride. Somehow I managed to push my way to the end of this game, and I was shocked by how quickly I adapted to not being able to understand what was on screen, and I feel a real sense of accomplishment for having made it all the way. That being said, while the game itself does feature some fairly hard dungeons, they only really start appearing near the end of the game. Other than that, this is by far the easiest of the SMT games that I have played to date. I basically just sunk all of my eggs into one demon, Yoshitsune, and had him kick the ass off the entire last quarter of the game.
Yo! Huh. On the peaks in the snow, he's a spooky mofo. Everything's gone a loony cause the mountain's haunted by Yoshitsune. Oh, it's gotta be the ghost!
Yoshitsune.
Yeah, boy.
Who's that? Who do they mean?
He's fat, he's fly, he's tall as...
Now I get to talk about Devil Summoner Soul Hackers, the game with a setting so layered and weird that it actually inspired me to make this video to begin with. Soul Hackers is the indirect sequel of Devil Summoner, being set a few years in the future and with a few returning characters. Just like in the last game, all of the shops are hiding in plain sight under the disguise of legitimate businesses. These are mostly new characters, with the obviously shady guy making a return, as well as the demon fusion man from before being a ship captain now. What does not carry over is the tone or setting of the last game. As the name implies, the setting is heavily inspired by hacker culture. In broad strokes, the setup for the story is about a revolutionary piece of technology that will allow the people of Amami City to connect to what is ostensibly a beta version of the Matrix. Also, there are demons that can infiltrate the Matrix and harm people through their computers, one of which ends up possessing a friend of yours and ends up becoming your partner throughout the game. Also featured in this game are a number of demons based on Native American animism, VR vision quests brought on by digital spirit animals, and an evil organization of dark summoners who are probably in charge of not Microsoft and are definitely distributing computer chips that steal people's souls. You, of course, are part of a rebellious group of hackers who end up finding out a little bit too much about this conspiracy and have made it their mission to expose what is really going on in Amami City. It's a really weird mix of cyberpunk, Native American mysticism, an investigative mystery, and straight-up demons. Oh, I guess that does sort of make it just like Shadowrun then, huh? Either way, I find it fascinating. And don't get me wrong, I know that the extended Megami Tensei franchise features a lot of weird stuff. There are dungeons inside of people's minds, Nocturne turns Tokyo into a Dyson sphere Inception style within the first 30 minutes, and Shin Megami Tensei 9 has a similar virtual reality theme to it, but it's also set in the apocalypse. Then like, another apocalypse just happens in the story. And honestly, it only gets weirder from there. The point is that this is all very new to someone who is used to a more traditional fantasy setting in his JRPGs, and it could be a lot to try and adjust to. But hey, if you were looking for the difficulty, I found it in this one. There's a couple of hidden bosses in this game, and the last one, or the last four, I should say, is a gauntlet featuring the protagonist of the last game, two versions of the protagonist of the next game, and also the final boss of that game, in order, and losing to any of them means starting over. And also, leaving the dungeon area that they are in, if you need to like stock up on items or grind more EXP, means that you have to do the entire dungeon all over again, which I had to do, in order to create a statistically perfect team of super demons to even stand a chance at not getting killed in one turn by the very first of those four bosses. This part of Soul Hackers is by far the highlight of the entire franchise for me so far, as it finally got me to sit down and start planning out who it was that I wanted in my team. Not only did I put together a specific team that I wanted, but I also had to figure out the method of fusing them so that they would inherit the right moves through the fusion system. And then after that, I would have to buff the hell out of their stats using Mitama Fusion. It started to feel like I was building a competitive Pokémon team, which is what I was looking for from the very start when I first picked these games up. I probably spent over 5 hours just fusing demons together and grinding for this fight, which maybe took a collective 2 hours to beat, but honestly, it felt totally worth it. And that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on the Shin Megami Tensei franchise as a whole. While playing these games, I easily spent twice as long online looking up stuff about the demons than I do actually touching the controller, and that is seriously where a lot of the fun comes from for me. Overall, these games are doing wonders to fill the Pokémon void in my life, and also to scratch an itch for a cooler, more stylistic type of RPG that I never really knew that I wanted. Talking to demons is fantastic, and I'll take demon negotiation over Pokeballs any day of the week. The difficulty is right at the level I want it to be at most of the time, and the soundtracks are instantly memorable, instantly downloaded to my computer, and are going to be part of my music library from now on. The demon designs are incredibly creative, and you can tell that there is a lot of effort put into the research of the various cultures and mythologies that inspire these characters. Although I will say that some of the designs are a little hit or miss, with some real standout winners and some pretty awful stinkers. I do sort of wish that there was a larger pool of moves to choose from in these games, something that would allow me to create more powerful gimmick teams, more than just your standard buffs, debuffs, healing, and attack moves. But then again, it would also probably make designing the difficulty of these games a lot more of a challenge. In short, it's a fantastic franchise. It allows me to say stupid shit like, oh, I had to get rid of Nyarlathotep because he didn't want to be in a party with Hecate and Nidhogger, and to actually have that sentence mean something to someone. This video ended up taking me so long to make that Shin Megami Tensei 5 is already released, and I've been playing and enjoying the ever-loving hell out of it. I don't have any way to capture the footage for it, but it's probably my game of the year already. It was very courteous of Atlus to release a new game for this franchise, just as I was jumping on board. Thank you, Atlus. Anyways, weird disorganized video, but that's gonna be all from me. I love you, bye-bye.
This might take a while.